Nowadays, mediums are looked at with a lot of skepticism and distrust. Of course, some do believe in this sort of work, and if we're all honest, there are perhaps a few instances in history where mediums have managed to engage in things we can't explain. One of the most prominent examples of this is the case of Daniel Dunglas Home, an enigma of a man who still has many scratching their heads to this very day. Daniel Dunglas Home was one of the most well-known physical mediums of the 1800s, and the man's reported abilities put today's mediums to shame. Hume could reportedly levitate to a great height, speak to the dead, and produce rapping and knocking sounds at will. Described as one of the most famous men of his era, even Harry Houdini spoke of him as one of the forerunners of mediums. Daniel conducted hundreds of séances in his time, all attended by many prominent Victorians. Some fully believed, others described Hume as a blatant fraud, but everyone was at the very least fascinated and caught under his spell. Daniel Dunglas Home was born in Curry, Scotland on 20th March 1833, and in his early life he was described as a nervous child who had supposedly paranormal experiences from an early age. According to Hume, his cradle rocked by itself, and he had a premonition of his cousin's death when he was very young. Hume lived with his aunt and uncle and emigrated to the United States with them in 1841. Attending school in Greenville, New York, Hume was close friends with a boy named Edwin, and the two discussed the afterlife, and if either were to die, they promised they would make contact after death. Hume and his aunt moved further away in New York, making home in Troy. Hume lost contact with his best friend and claims he saw a vision one night of Edwin standing at the foot of his bed. Based on their pact, Hume wondered whether his friend was dead. A few days later, Hume received a letter that his friend Edwin had indeed died of malignant dysentery 3 days before his vision. Hume's mother Elizabeth also emigrated from Scotland a few years later. However, she died shortly after, and according to Hume, predicted her own death. Hume claimed he saw her in a vision, saying, "Dan, 12 o'clock, which was the time of her death. Hume turned to religion after his mother's death in an attempt to make sense of everything he was experiencing. Noises and rappings began to haunt Daniel's house, with ministers and priests called to the house to investigate. One of them was intimidated by Hume, calling him a devil. However, Hume believed all of the activity was a gift from God. The noises persisted, and Hume was thrown out of his home when the family had finally had enough. Hume was 18 years old by then, and went to stay with a friend in Lebanon, Connecticut. Hume decided to begin holding his own séances. The first was covered by a Hartford newspaper. It was reported that the table moved without anyone touching it, and kept moving when people were physically fighting to stop it. This report launched Hume's fame as he began travelling around, apparently healing the sick and communicating with the dead, although he claimed not to be very charismatic and his shyness was a large issue for him. Hume said he did not see the people he visited as clients, but people the same as him. He claimed his goal was to demonstrate immortality, not to make money. In 1852, Hume was a guest at the house of Rufus Emerald in Springfield, Massachusetts, and at this point he was giving séances many times a day, being visited by flocks of people. Several notable people visited Hume at this time. A Harvard professor named David Wells and the editor of the New York Evening Post, William Cullen Bryant, were among them. They were all convinced of Hume's credibility and stated that the room was well lit, full inspections took place, and they believed they were not deceived or lied to. On this occasion, it is claimed 5 heavy-set men sat on a table, but even that could not stop it moving. Hume was intensely investigated by figures such as Professor Robert Hare and John W. Edmonds, a trial court judge, who started off very skeptical but ended their investigations believing that Daniel Dunglas Home was not deceiving people. Things only got stranger when in August 1852, at the house of Ward Cheney in South Manchester, Hume was reported to have levitated twice, all the way up to the ceiling of the room. However, those present did make a point to mention that the room was quite dimly lit, so they could not be sure this was genuine. In 1853, Daniel decided to switch focus and took a medicine course. While studying, Hume was offered money for séances but apparently turned them down and was focused on his degree. Sadly, Hume was forced to stop his studies in early 1854 when he fell ill to tuberculosis. Doctors suggested Hume recuperate in Europe, and so Hume took a boat to England in March of that year. Upon arriving in London, Daniel again started hosting séances. Once again, claims surfaced that he was seen to levitate. In the words of British chemist William Crookes, "We all saw him rise from the ground slowly to a height of about 6 inches, remain there for about 10 seconds, and then slowly descend." Hume's fame reached incredible levels as he began to travel across Europe as a guest of wealthy patrons. In Paris, he was even summoned to perform a séance for Napoleon III. Queen Sophia of the Netherlands also hosted him and wrote of her experience. "I felt a hand touch my finger. I saw a heavy golden bell move alone from one person to another, and my handkerchief tie itself in a knot. It is wonderful. I'm so glad to have seen it." The fantastical stories of Daniel continued for many years, and in 1867 Hume was supposedly witnessed by 3 people levitating out of a third-storey window of one room and coming in back through another. One of these witnesses was Hume's closest friend at the time, Lord Adair. The other 2 were Captain Wynne and Lord Lindsay, British astronomers. However, the claim has been disputed by American author John Sladdick, who raised the point that the 3 witnesses gave contradictory information about this apparent levitation. The 3 gave conflicting claims about where this took place, the height of the building, and whether it was dark or light. English writer Joseph McCabe said that Lord Adair had admitted there was a 19-inch windowsill outside the window. Hume could have easily been standing on that and simply appeared to be levitating. Upon investigation, Lord Adair was pressed to admit that all he ever saw was Hume standing upright outside the window. It's also been established that 2 days before the levitation, Hume had opened the same window, stepped out, and stood on the outside ledge in the presence of 2 witnesses. However, believers like to claim that standing on the ledge is different to actually levitating in through the window, which a couple of the witnesses maintained happened. Between 1870 and 1873, chemist and physicist William Crookes skeptically began to carry out experiments to determine the validity of Hume's phenomena. Hume was investigated by Crookes in a self-built laboratory in northern London. Crookes believed after his findings that there was no doubt the existence of a psychic force within Daniel Dunglas Hume. However, the scientific community highly disputes and is critical of Crookes' discoveries. It has been confirmed that in a lot of the experiments, Hume was very much in control of the situation and would not let Crookes be near him and would shift attention from himself to other things in the room. Scottish meteorologist Balfour Stewart asserted that the main flaw with Crookes' experiments is they were not conducted in broad daylight before a large, unbiased audience, and the results were inconclusive. Skeptics also thought Crookes was spending too much time with Hume, and it was clouding his judgment, as Hume was using his charm and friendly nature to get Crookes on side. Crookes summed up his opinion and experience of Daniel Dunglas Hume as follows: "During the whole of my knowledge of D.D. Hume, extending for several years, I never once saw the slightest occurrence that would make me suspicious that he was attempting to play tricks. He was scrupulously sensitive on this point, and never felt hurt at anyone taking precautions against deception. To those who knew him, Hume was one of the most lovable men, and his perfect genuineness and uprightness were beyond suspicion." English writer J.P. Earwalker wrote a damning science review in 1871 in which he stated about Crookes' experiments, "Even to call them unscientific is not strong enough. Clumsy and futile are much nearer the truth." Legendary magician Harry Houdini, who had spoke positively of Hume in the past, commented that Crookes' experiments could not be trusted. He wrote, "There's not a slightest doubt in my mind that this brainy man was hoodwinked." Physicist Victor Stenger claimed Crookes gave all the power over to Hume. For example, during séances, Stenger said Crookes still allowed Hume to call all the shots. Hume would tell everyone to take their hands off the table and would take charge of the session instead of allowing Crookes to do so. One of the most well-known experiments Crookes conducted was with the use of an accordion. Hume would sit at a table with Crookes and another observer on either side of him, each with a foot on one of Hume's feet. Hume would then put his hand inside a wire cage that was pushed under the table. One of Hume's hands was laid on the top of the table, and the other inside of the cage, which held an accordion on the non-key side, so the keyed end was hanging downward. The accordion was reported to have played musical sounds. However, many have picked this apart, saying the amount of light in the room was not stated, and the accordion was never observed in good light. English author Frank Podmore ridiculed the experiment, saying there was actually no evidence the accordion played at all, as the keys were not observed to have moved. He suggested the music sounds could have come from an automatic instrument that Hume had hidden. Magician Harry Evans proposed that Hume used a musical box attached to his leg. Daniel Dunglas Hume was eventually forced to retire due to ill health. With the tuberculosis he had battled much of his life. He passed away on 21st of June 1886 at the age of 53 and was buried in the Russian cemetery of Saint-Germain-en-Laye in Paris. This man remains a true enigma, because although many suspected Hume of being a fraud, he was never directly caught or proven to be engaged in any tricks, certainly not publicly. That is quite impressive considering the amount of mediums back then who were caught out, and of course the many that are today. This doesn't mean Hume was genuine, of course, and the idea of a man being able to fly and contact the dead is always one we tend to dismiss and laugh at. But who knows? Hume certainly, at the very least, caused a stir and fascinated people. Whatever the answer, Hume's legacy is an incredible story, one that always provokes a reaction and leaves us still to this day seeking answers.